been improved economically, that people in general, all the statistics, from GNP, GDP, all of these things, showed an increase in the last 2 decades of the Shah's period. But that wasn't enough. People were not happy that simply they were living better than their fathers were, for example. The Shah kept talking about Iran beating Japan, Iran beating Germany. The expectation people had far exceeded the ability of the Shah to deliver. And even the modicum of ability to deliver that he had was very much compromised in '76 when the price of oil suddenly dipped. So in '77, you basically have the makings of a perfect revolution, of a perfect storm. The economy that was heating up. The Shah gave away $1.4 billion in 1975. Gave away, literally gave away, in grants to every place. Like my most favorite is London water system. Iran, they might need it, but they didn't need it to get from the Shah. But you know, the Shah had been humiliated by the British. He wanted to humiliate them back. That's the only logic I can draw. I can't say for certain that that's what. But he gave away at one point. And then 2 years later, he was back on the market borrowing money. Iran had to borrow from Chase Manhattan $700 million. And because he was so embarrassed, he basically borrowed illegally. They didn't take it to the Majlis, giving rise to this enormous conspiracy theory that the Rockefellers engineered the hostage crisis because they wanted their $700 million back. This conspiracy was large enough that there was congressional hearings about it. So the economic downfall made it even impossible for him to do the modicum of. So the other thing, I think, the dislocation that happened, the economic dislocation that happened, is that the White Revolution organized the land reform. And it was a very misconceived idea. First of all, it introduced the concept of confiscation. It began the idea that it is okay to confiscate a land if the country's economic needs demand it. One person opposed this, was Ebtahaj. From prison, he wrote a letter saying, don't do this. This is not, you're not going to have a capitalist economic development if you allow expropriation like this. But the result was that you had the largest migration in Iran's history, 3,000-year history, from the countryside to the city. And they converged on the city, and the Shah's regime did nothing to try to organize, mobilize, educate, inculcate, train, socialize, whatever you want to call it. They converged. They gathered in shanty towns around Tehran, in other places. They brought with them their religious values. And the only place that they could go for solace was the mosques that were being built. From '62, I have found evidence that the religious forces, I named the name, Beheshti, Muhammad Beheshti, in an article he wrote in '62, he said, if we want to have a future in this country, we need to mobilize a way to organize the urbanites from all classes, including the new modern middle classes. And they did it. They organized Hosseini Ershad and places like Hosseini Ershad. They began, and of course they were helped in this. I mean, let's not just give them credit. They were helped in this by people like Al-Ahmad, intellectuals who came out and suddenly discovered a new revolutionary component in Shiism that had not existed. It is not by accident that the man, you know, there's been one Shiite Ayatollah who has been publicly hung in Iran in all the Shiite history that we know. That's Ayatollah Nuri. And he was hung by the fatwa of 3 other top Ayatollahs, including the one I named. Now, why is it that 75 years later, an Ayatollah who continues the line of Nuri has become the leader of the Iranian constitutional, the continuation of the constitutional revolution? Because 79 is essentially the continuation of 79. It wants democracy. Ayatollah Khomeini, who clearly had said, Nuri is my hero, is now the leader of this democratic movement. Part of the way was paved by Al-Ahmad, the first person who said Nuri was a martyr to freedom. The same Nuri that had said in 2005 that we do not want a constitutional government. We want hukumat mashru'eh. So intellectuals did their part. Savak did its part because it made it impossible for any other force to organize. Khomeini's books were banned in Iran. These books that I told you that have these rather remarkable ideas. A book that says in 44 that why is it that a man like Khosravi is allowed to live when have Iranians lost their ghayrat? Isn't there a single Muslim with ghayrat and honor to allow someone like Khosravi, one of the most eminent historians and scholars in Iran, a year and a half, 2 years later, somebody with ghayrat came and went to Majlis and chopped Khosravi to pieces. The same force that chopped Khosravi to pieces, Fadayan Islam, 5 years later, were praised in Iran's democratic parliament by forces close to Mossadegh and other nationalists. The person that had assassinated Razmara, who was the continuation of the person that assassinated Khosravi, was praised in the parliament as a national hero. They broke the constitution, interfered in the judiciary, let him go, and the speaker of the parliament went to visit him and kissed him on his forehead and said, "You're a pride of a nation." Those people who voted for this, and many of the top National Front leaders voted for it, they are responsible for paving the way for this ascent.
Two questions. One is short. I know that your book's name is The Shah, and you consider the fall of Shah the most significant event of current history. Why not the rise of Khomeini instead of fall of the Shah, the most significant? Another thing, in American politics, when there are two parties, sometimes there is a spoiler. A third person comes, takes the some vote, and I think you have said, and some others have said, that starting Mashruti revolution, Mossadegh's time, Khomeini's time, there has always been a spoiler. For example, a Tudeh party, Americans were afraid of Tudeh party or the communists. What do you think, what country, what person, what force is a spoiler today that delays the fall of the regime?
Well, the answer to your question is the first question is why didn't we call the book The Rise of Khomeini? I didn't call it because that's not what the book is about. There are many other names that would have been sexier, would have sold more books, but it would have been wrong. I would have been ashamed to appear in this public and say that I wrote a book about the Shah and called it The Shah's Sex Life, for example. That would sell very much. And, you know, and he had a very active sex life. And, you know, I could have tainted some parts of it, worked it to make it even more interesting. I won't get into it, but those who have read the book would know. But that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to write an honest book. And the book is about the Shah. And it isn't even about the fall of the Shah. The book is about the Shah, his rise and fall. The second, I don't know who it is that says there have been spoilers. I don't I don't know about spoilers. I think what has happened to Iran has happened because we as a nation keep making mistakes. It is us that has done this to us. It is not Qatar, it is not England, it is not communism, it is us. Whatever has happened in Iran has happened by our hand, by our idiocies, by our attempt to save our own reputations rather than saving the country. When Sadiqi came forward and tried to save the country, Sadiqi, who had been the most uncompromising opponent of the Shah for 25 years, he refused to even get a passport. He said, this is a regime that a coup has brought it. I don't recognize it. I won't get a passport. In '78, he saw the country in danger. He saw what was on the horizon. He was willing to forego all of his personal animosities. He was willing to jeopardize his personal reputation. One of the main forces against him was Jabhat Milli. Leaders of Jabhat Milli, who issued proclamations against him, who went to him and told him, you know, you will spoil your reputation. And he famously said, my reputation is not for me to take to my grave. My reputation is for my country. If I can save the country, hell with my reputation. If we had 100 leaders like him, if when the Shah declared the one-party system, we had 5 people who had the guts, the gumption to say, Your Majesty, this is wrong. This is against the Constitution. You can't do this. What did they do? They competed with one another to become the first secretary of the party. And then they come in exile and write memoirs and say, yes, I told His Majesty, Your Majesty, this is wrong. The Tudeh party was, in my view, very instrumental in many damages to Iran's democratic movement. But the Tudeh party was essentially Iran's intellectual elite. They brought into their fold Iran's intellectual elite. If 20 leaders of the party had done what Maliki had done, Maliki very early on saw that this is not a party created for Iran. This is a party created for the Soviets. He realized that the Azerbaijan movement was created under order of Mossadegh. I now have the literal command. It's a letter in 13 articles. Stalin says, create Ferghe Demokrat, call it Ferghe Demokrat, this is your budget, this is the number of papers. If 20 people had stood up and said, look, we want a communist party, but we wanted to serve Iran's interests, not Soviet Union, we wouldn't have had these things happen to us. So my sense is that the spoiler has been us, ourselves. It is we who have failed to understand what it means to be responsible members of a democracy. It means we need to put from our, it's not just taking, democracy is not just taking rights. Democracy is responsibility. It's responsibility of citizenship, responsibility of understanding what has happened to us. You know, these documents have been here for 30 years. Some of them have been here for 30 years. Some of them have been declassified recently.
So it's in the genes?
It's my turn.
It's not in the genes. I don't believe